Good morning, church. Pastor Ben here again. If you're anything like me, you have something in your life, some sin that you have difficulty getting rid of. This is often called in the literature a besotting sin. It's a sin that just sticks with you and just seems like it keeps coming back over and over and over again. And for many of us, it's something dangerous for us, or maybe even illegal. You can't stop drinking. You stop for a while, and then the next thing you know, you're right back doing it again. Or maybe it's drugs, and you seem like you're doing okay for a while, and then you're just right back in. And you make promises to God, you make promises to your family, you struggle with it, and it won't go away. Maybe it's cigarettes, maybe it's lying, maybe it's who knows, it could be any number of things, using foul language, and you find yourself right back in the same activities. Maybe it's a sexual sin, maybe it's a bad relationship that you're in, a bad boy or girl that you continue to chase, and you break up with them knowing they're bad for you, but then next thing you know, you're right back there again. So people in this situation, which is most of us, very often find themselves asking the question, how many times do you pick yourself back up and move on before you give up? The good news is, if you've been one of these people, like myself, you're not alone. We all struggle with that. And one of Satan's greatest weapons is to try to convince us that we are alone, that we're the only ones dealing with the thing that we're dealing with. The Apostle Paul, whom we've talked about, and who wrote most of the New Testament, knew exactly how this felt. And here's what he had to say about it in the book of Romans. He says, "We know that the law is spiritual, but I am unspiritual, sold as a slave to sin." That sounds familiar. "I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do, but what I hate, I do. And if I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good." I agree. The thing I'm doing is a bad thing to do. "As it is no longer I myself who do it, but it is the sin living in me. For I know that good itself does not dwell in me, that is, in my sinful nature, or in my flesh, in my fleshly desires. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do. This I keep on doing. Now, if I do what I do not want to do, it is no longer I who do it, but it is sin living in me that does it." And he goes on to describe this situation, and he's being very personal about it. It's obvious he's dealing with something very specific he has in mind that he continues to deal with. The book of Romans is like the greatest book that the Apostle Paul wrote, full of deep theology about Christ and what Christ has done on the cross. And yet, in the middle of this book, he stops and says, we all have this common condition, that we can't stop doing the very thing we know that God doesn't want us to do. What's the matter with us? Why do we keep doing that? In another book, he talks about this thorn in the flesh. Now, we don't know if it's the same thing. A lot of scholars have debated about what the thorn in the flesh was. Was it the same thing he talked about in the book of Romans? I kind of think it might be, but I don't know. Nobody knows for sure. But here's what he says there, is that he asked God to take that away from him, and God said no. God said, "My grace is sufficient for you. I've given you this thorn so that you will stay humble," which is kind of a scary thought, really. How many of us need a thorn in our flesh to keep us humble? I'm afraid sometimes I certainly do. One of the things that Jesus talks about a lot is forgiveness. And at one point, Peter asked Jesus, how many times do I have to forgive my brother? 7 times 7? I mean, I'll keep count, but I don't want to go too far. And Jesus says, nah, Peter, 70 times 7. And if you can count to 490 as far as the number of times you forgive your brother, then you have the problem. That's basically what Jesus is saying there. You won't get there. You won't get to 490. Jesus in another place says that he wants us to be perfect or mature, like our Heavenly Father is mature. So it stands to reason that Peter's really asking, how do I become closer to God, right? How do I be more like God? How many times do I forgive my brother? Well, God would forgive you 490 times, 7 times 70. But God doesn't, just like Jesus telling Peter, God doesn't keep count. Because love keeps no record of wrongs, Paul says in another place, and God is love. So the question becomes, how many times do I pick myself up? Do I stop this thing that I do that I can't keep myself from doing? How many times do I throw the cigarettes away, throw the bottle away, get rid of the pills, get rid of the drugs, commit to using better language, commit to not being hateful, commit to forgiving someone, commit to loving better, commit to not looking at those girls, commit to not looking at those boys, commit to stopping this relationship that's bad for me, commit to so many things that we know in our heart of hearts are just plain wrong. How many times do we do that before we give up? And the answer is, we keep starting over. We keep allowing God to forgive us every time without end. How many times? Every time. Brothers and sisters, don't give up. Persevere and stay with it. And if you find yourself back there again, doing that same old thing again, confess it to God, ask for forgiveness, and start over again. Thank you so much. Have a nice day, and God bless you. Pray for your church and your leadership as we slowly move back to normalcy, and keep being the church.